Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This time we're going to be looking at Tide Bond, Bonded Duet, Book 2.
Mm-hmm.
It's by Abigail Davies.
Oh, okay.
But we're not doing a typical book club kind of thing here.
Yeah.
We're using excerpts from this romance novel
Right.
to explore some heavier topics,
Right.
like trust and hidden dangers and how grief can distort your reality.
Wow.
So, our main character is Belle,
Okay.
and she's pregnant. And she finds herself with a supposed friend from college named Curtis after she goes through a really traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
And she's seeking safety and stability. But cracks start to appear in this facade of safety pretty quickly.
Mm.
And we're going to explore how the author builds that tension and keeps us guessing about who to trust.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how the author foreshadows like the danger that Belle is in, even while she's totally oblivious to it. It's like one of those movies where you know the killer's there, but
Right.
the character doesn't.
Exactly. And one of the ways she does this is through Curtis's evasiveness about his past.
Mm-hmm.
It's like he's hiding something big. And his reactions to Belle's simple mentions of going home are way too intense. It just makes you, the reader, feel uneasy, even though Belle's still feeling secure.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been in a situation where your initial perception of someone was completely wrong?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
It really makes you think about those subtle red flags that we tend to ignore.
For sure. And it really highlights how vulnerable we can be when we are seeking comfort and stability.
Mhm.
And with Belle, her vulnerability is even more amplified by her grief over the presumed death of her boyfriend Ford.
Right.
And this isn't just a plot device,
Yeah?
It's a really clever way for the author to show how grief can distort our reality and make us more susceptible to manipulation. Yeah. So Curtis uses Belle's emotional state to isolate her, to control the information she gets and basically prey on her fears.
Mm-hmm.
And there's even this really chilling scene where she dismantles her cell phone,
Oh, yeah.
thinking it's for her own safety. But really, it's just cutting her off from any support.
That part really got me. I mean,
Yeah.
think about how many of us rely on our phones for connection and even safety these days.
Absolutely.
And the author is using that everyday object to show how easily
Right.
someone in Curtis's position could manipulate someone who's grieving and looking for security. It makes you wonder,
Yeah.
how can grief make us so vulnerable?
It's a complex issue, but one way to think about it is through this lens of cognitive dissonance.
Okay.
When we're grieving, we're already in a state of emotional upheaval, trying to make sense of the world, and it suddenly feels chaotic and unsafe. So someone like Curtis can exploit that by offering a simple comforting narrative that fits Belle's need for safety and stability, even if it contradicts the reality of his actions. So he's creating this false sense of security. It's like a bubble where Belle can escape the pain of her loss, even if it means ignoring those doubts and red flags.
So she's basically clinging to this idea of safety with Curtis, even as the evidence against him mounts. It's like she's choosing to believe the lie because the truth is just too painful to bear.
Right.
And that makes the moment of truth when everything unravels even more impactful.
Exactly. And that's where the story takes a turn. Belle discovers Curtis's true nature and his connection to the deaths of people she cared about. And this isn't just a betrayal, it's a complete shattering of the world she thought she built with him. It forces her to confront the very real danger she's in and to understand the depth of his manipulation, Yeah, it's like the ground falls out from under her and suddenly she has to face this reality.
This is where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Belle's not just a victim in this story. I mean, she's pregnant.
Yeah.
Yes. And vulnerable because of her grief. But she's also incredibly resourceful and courageous. She fights back. And the way she uses her wits to protect herself and her unborn child is a huge departure from that, like damsel in distress trope that we see so often.
Right. And I think it's important to note that Belle's transformation into a survivor is gradual. It's fueled by these small acts of defiance throughout the story. Like when she questions Curtis's evasiveness or holds on to the memory of Ford. The author isn't just giving us a sudden, unrealistic shift in character.
Right.
She's really carefully building up to this moment.
Right.
Where Belle takes control.
It's like she's reclaiming her power piece by piece. Yeah. And that culminates in this incredibly symbolic scene where she uses a gun to defend herself.
Oh, wow.
And it's the same gun that Curtis used to kill someone else.
Yeah.
Which adds another layer of complexity to the situation.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What does that tell us about Belle's state of mind at this point?
Well, it shows that she's moved beyond fear at this point. She's not just reacting to the immediate threat. She's actively fighting back against the person who represents everything she's lost and everything she fears. Using Curtis's own weapon against him is such a powerful statement. It symbolizes her refusal to be a victim any longer.
Right.
And her determination to protect herself and her child, no matter the cost.
This brings us to the aftermath, which is just as important as the confrontation itself. Belle goes through a long and difficult journey back home, both physically and emotionally. She's carrying the scars of abuse, the guilt of being deceived, and the weight of reconciling with her family, who she pushed away, while she was under Curtis's influence. It's a lot to unpack,
Yeah.
and it's made even more complicated by the revelation that Ford is actually alive.
Oh, wow. Talk about a twist. We find out that Ford wasn't killed. It was all a plan to infiltrate a dangerous cartel and bring them down. He had to go deep undercover, fake his own death.
Yeah.
And all the while, he was carrying this burden of believing that Belle had moved on with Curtis.
This adds another layer of emotional complexity to this situation, right? I mean, on the one hand, you have Belle, who is pregnant with Ford's child and still dealing with the trauma of Curtis's abuse.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the man she thought was dead comes back into her life. How do you even begin to process that?
It's a lot to handle, and the author does a good job of portraying the messiness of their situation. It's not like a clean, happy reunion. There's joy, of course, but also the weight of their shared history, the pain they've both endured, and the uncertainty of rebuilding their lives together after everything that's happened.
It's a reminder that even when love is strong, it doesn't erase the past or magically solve all the problems. The author doesn't give us a fairy tale ending. She gives us a realistic portrayal of a couple who are trying to navigate incredibly difficult circumstances. It makes their story even more compelling because it feels relatable, even with all the dramatic twists and turns.
Absolutely. And it raises some important questions about forgiveness and healing and the long-term impact of trauma, for example. How does Belle reconcile her feelings for Ford with the pain and loss caused by Curtis's actions, knowing that they were connected? How do they, as a couple, move forward and create a stable and healthy environment for their child, while still dealing with the ghosts of their past?
And we can't forget about the larger context here. We've been so focused on Belle and Ford's story. But what about the ripple effects of these events? What about their families and the other people who were caught in the crossfire? The outline mentioned exploring the impact on families and the pursuit of justice. But we haven't really touched on those aspects yet.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the central romance. But these events have far-reaching consequences. For example, think about Belle's family. They were kept in the dark about her situation, worried sick while she was under Curtis's control. Then there's the investigation into Curtis's crimes, and the question of whether he and his father, Eduardo Garza, the cartel leader Ford was trying to take down, will face justice. The story touches on these elements, but there's so much more to explore.
This deep dive was supposed to be about uncovering the hidden depths of a romance novel, but it feels like we've stumbled onto something much bigger. We're talking about justice and accountability, and the systemic issues that allow abuse and manipulation to flourish.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of this story, Belle's voice. We see her regaining it throughout these excerpts. But how will she use it moving forward? Will she speak out about her experiences, advocate for others who've suffered similar trauma, or will she choose to focus on healing and rebuilding her life privately?
It's a question that lingers, even after you finish reading these excerpts, which I think speaks to the power of the story itself. It prompts you to think beyond the immediate narrative and consider the wider implications of these events, both for the characters and for the world they inhabit.
And that's what makes this deep dive so thought-provoking. It's not just about analyzing a romance novel. It's about exploring the human condition, understanding the complexities of trust and betrayal, and considering how we as individuals and as a society respond to trauma and seek justice.
It feels like we only scratched the surface, and yet we uncovered so many layers of meaning and complexity. It makes you realize that even something that's marketed as a romance novel can offer like a powerful lens to examine real-world issues.
It really does, and it brings us back to that initial question. How do we balance the need for trust with the need for self-preservation? In a world where appearances can be so deceiving, Belle's story is a stark reminder that vulnerability can be exploited, especially when we're grappling with grief or trauma. It highlights the importance of listening to our intuition, recognizing those red flags that tell us something isn't right, and being discerning about who we allow into our lives and our hearts.
It's a tough balance to strike.
Right.
Because we don't want to live in a constant state of fear and suspicion. But we also need to protect ourselves from those who might take advantage of our kindness or our vulnerability.
Yeah.
I think Belle's journey shows us the importance of finding that sweet spot, that balance between open-heartedness and healthy skepticism.
Exactly. And it's not like a one-size-fits-all solution. You know what feels safe and trustworthy for one person might be a red flag for another. So it's about being self-aware, understanding our own vulnerability, and paying attention to those gut feelings that tell us something's not quite right.
If any of our listeners are intrigued by what we discussed, I highly recommend checking out Tide Bond, Bonded Duet, Book 2 by Abigail Davies. There's so much more to unpack. You know the depth of the characters, the intricacies of the plot, and the author's nuanced exploration. Of these complex themes, we just touched on a few key points, but the novel offers like a really rich and rewarding experience for those who are willing to take the plunge.
You'll find yourself questioning your own assumptions, empathizing with the characters who make good and bad choices, and ultimately, confronting some uncomfortable truths about human nature. It's a story that stays with you long after you finish the last page, and it makes you reflect on your own experiences and the choices you make when it comes to trust and vulnerability.
This deep dive has been quite a journey, and I hope you found it as thought-provoking as we have. It's a reminder that even within genres we think we know, like romance, there are hidden depths waiting to be explored, and sometimes those unexpected journeys can lead us to the most profound insights about ourselves and the world around us.
We only scratched the surface. But hopefully this sparked your curiosity and gave you a new perspective on the power of storytelling.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
No.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning,
And never stop learning.